David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, Chapter 32, The Beginning of a Long Journey. The news of what had happened soon spread through the town, insomuch that as I passed along the streets next morning, I overheard people speaking of it at their doors. Many were hard upon her, some were hard upon him, but toward her second father and her lover there was but one sentiment. Among all kinds of people, a respect for them in their distress prevailed, which was full of gentleness and delicacy. The seafaring men kept apart. When those two were seen early, walking with slow steps on the beach, and stood in knots talking compassionately among themselves. It was on the beach, close down by the sea, that I found them. It would have been easy to perceive that they had not slept at all last night. They looked worn, and I thought Mr. Peggotty's head was bowed more in one night than in all the years I had known him, but they were both as grave and steady as the sea itself. "We have had a mort talk, sir," said Mr. Peggotty to me, when we had all three walked a little while in silence, "of what we ought and doesn't ought and doin't ought to do. But we see our course now." I happened to glance at Ham, then looking out to sea upon the distant light, and a frightful thought came into my mind. Not that his face was angry, for it was not. I recall nothing but an expression of stern determination in it, that if ever he encountered Steerforth, he would kill him. "My duty here, sir," said Mr. Peggotty, "is done, and I'm a-going to seek my—" He stopped and went on with a firmer voice. "I'm a-going to seek her. That's my duty evermore." He shook his head when I asked him where he would see her, or where he would seek her, and inquired if I were going to London tomorrow. I told him I had not gone today, fearing to lose the chance of being of any service to him, but that I was ready to go when he would. "I'll go along with you, sir," he rejoined, "if you're agreeable tomorrow." We walked again for a while in silence. "Ham," he presently resumed, "he'll hold to his present work, and go and live along with my sister. The old boat yonder—" "Will you desert the old boat, Mr. Peggotty?" I gently interposed. "My wish is, sir, as it shall look day and night, winter and summer, as it has always looked since she first knowed it. If ever she should come a-wandering back, I wouldn't have the old place seem to cast her off, you understand, but to tempt her to draw nigher to it." I could not speak to him in reply, though I tried. "Every night," said Mr. Peggotty, "as regular as night comes, the candle must be stood in its old pane of glass, that if ever she should see it, it may seem to say, 'Come back, my child, come back.' If ever there's a knock, Ham, particular soft knock arter dark, at your aunt's door, don't you go nigh it. Let it be her, not you, that sees my fallen child." In the morning I was joined by Mr. Peggotty and my old nurse, and went at an early hour to the coach office, where Mrs. Gummidge and Ham were waiting to take leave of us. "Master Davy," Ham whispered, drawing me aside while Mr. Peggotty was stowing his bag among the luggage. "His life is quite broke up. He don't know where he's going, and he don't know what's afore him. He's bound upon a voyage that'll last on and off all the rest of his days. Take my word for it, unless he finds what he's a-seeking of, I am sure you'll be a friend to him, Master Davy." "Trust me, I will indeed," said I, shaking hands with Ham earnestly. When we got to our journey's end, our first pursuit was to look about for a little lodging for Peggotty, where her brother could have a bed. We were so fortunate as to find one of a very clean and cheap description, over a chandler's shop, only two streets removed from me. When we'd engaged his domicile, I bought some cold meat at an eating house and took my fellow travelers home to tea, a proceeding I regret to share, which did not meet with Mrs. Krupp's approval, but quite the contrary. I ought to observe, however, in explanation of that lady's state of mind, that she was much offended by Peggotty's tucking up her widow's gown before she had been 10 minutes in the place and setting to work to dust my bedroom. This Mrs. Krupp regarded in light of a liberty, and a liberty, she said, was a thing she never allowed. Mr. Peggotty proposed first seeing Mrs. Steerforth, as I felt bound to assist him in this, and also to meditate between them, with the view of sparing the mother's feelings as much as possible. I wrote to her that night. I told her as mildly as I could what was wrong with what his wrong was, and what my own share in his injury. I said he was a man in very common life, but of most gentle and upright character, and that I ventured to express a hope that she would not refuse to see him in his heavy trouble. I mentioned 2 o'clock in the afternoon as the hour of our coming, and I sent the letter myself by the first coach in the morning. At the appointed time we stood at the door. No Littimer appeared. The pleasanter face which replaced his on the occasion of my last visit answered to our summons and went before us to the drawing-room. Mrs. Steerforth was sitting there, but Rosa Dartle glided as we went in from another part of the room and stood behind her chair. I saw directly in his mother's face that she knew from himself what he had done. She sat upright in her armchair with a steady, immovable, passionless air that it seemed as if nothing could disturb. She looked very steadfastly at Mr. Peggotty when he stood before her, and he looked quite as steadfastly at her. Rosa Dartle's keen glance comprehended all of us. For some moments not a word was spoken. She motioned to Mr. Peggotty to be seated. He said in a low voice, "I shouldn't feel natural, ma'am, to sit down in this house. I'd sooner stand." And this was succeeded by another silence, which she broke thus. "I know with deep regret what has brought you here. What do you want of me? What do you ask me to do?" He put his hat under his arm, feeling in his breast for Emily's letter, took it out, unfolded it, and gave it to her. "Please read that, ma'am. That's my niece's hand." She read it in that same stately, impressive way, untouched by its contents, as far as I could see, and returned it to him. Unless he brings me back a lady, said Mr. Peggotty, tracking out that part with his finger. "I come to know, ma'am, whether he will keep his word." "No," she returned. "Why not?" said Mr. Peggotty. "It is impossible. He would disgrace himself. He cannot fail to know that she is far below him." "Raise her up," said Mr. Peggotty. "She is uneducated and ignorant." "Maybe she's not, maybe she is," said Mr. Peggotty. "I think not, ma'am, but I'm no judge of them things. Teach her better." "Since you oblige me to speak more plainly, which I am very unwilling to do, her humble connections would render such a thing impossible if nothing else did." "Hark to this, ma'am," he returned slowly and quietly. "You know what it is to love your child. So do I. If she was 100 times my child, I could love her more. You don't know what it is to lose your child. I do. All the heaps of riches in the world would be nought to me if they was mine to buy her back. But save her from this disgrace, and she shall never be disgraced by us. Not one of us that she growed up among, not one of us that's lived along with her, and had her for their all in all, these many year, will ever look upon her pretty face again, will be content to let her be, will be content to think of her far off, as if she was underneath another sun and sky, will be content to trust her to her husband, to her little children perhaps, and bide the time when all of us shall be alike in quality afore our God." The rugged eloquence of which he spoke was not devoid of all effect. She still preserved her proud manner, but there was a touch of softness in her voice as she answered, "I justify nothing. I make no counter-accusations, but I am sorry to repeat it is impossible. Such a marriage would irretrievably blight my son's career and ruin his prospects. Nothing is more certain than that it never can take place, and never will. If there is any other compensation—" "I am looking at the likeness of the face," interrupted Mr. Peggotty, with a steady but kindly eye, "that has looked at me in my home, at my fireside, in my boat. We're not smiling and friendly when it was so treacherous that I go half wild when I think of it." The likeness of that face don't turn to burning fire at the thought of offering money to me for my child's blight and ruin. It's as bad, I don't know, being a lady. But what it's worse. She changed now in a moment. An angry flush overspread her features, and she said, in an intolerant manner, grasping the armchair tightly with her hands, "What compensation can you make me for opening such a pit between me and my son? What is your love to mine? What is your separation to ours?" Mr. Dartle softly touched her, and bent down her head to whisper. Miss Dartle softly touched her and bent down her head to whisper, but she would not hear a word. "No, Rosa, not a word. Let the man listen to what I say. My son, who has been the object of my life, to whom its every thought has been devoted, whom I have gratified from a child in every wish, from whom I have had no separate existence since his birth, to take up in a moment with a miserable girl and avoid me, to repay my confidence with systemic deception for her sake and quit me for her, to set this wretched fancy against his mother's claims upon her, his duty, love, respect, gratitude, claims that every day and hour of his life should have strengthened the ties that nothing could be proof against. Is this no injury?" Again, Rosa Dartle tried to soothe her, again insufficiently. "I say, Rosa, not a word. If he can stake all his upon the lightest object, I can stake my upon a greater purpose. Let him go where he will, with the means that my love has secured to him. Does he think to reduce me by long absence? He knows his mother very little if he does. Let him put away his whim now, and he is welcome back. Let him not put her away now, and he never shall come near me, living or dying, while I can raise my hand to make a sign against it, unless, being rid of her forever, he comes humbly to me and begs for my forgiveness. This is my right. This is the acknowledgement I will have. This is the separation that there is between us. And is this," she added, looking at her visitor with the proud, intolerant air with which she had begun, "no injury?" Well, I heard and saw the mother as she said these words. I seemed to hear and see the son defying them. All that I had ever seen in him of an unyielding, willful spirit I saw in her. She rose with an air of dignity to leave the room when Mr. Peggotty signified that it was needless. With this we departed, leaving her standing by her elbow chair, a picture of a noble presence and a handsome face. We had, on our way out, to cross a paved hall with glass sides and roof, over which a vine was trained. Its leaves and shoots were green then, and the day being sunny, a pair of glass doors leading to the garden were thrown open. Rosa Dartle entering this way with a noiseless step, when we were close to them, addressed herself to me. "You do well," she said, "indeed, to bring this fellow here," and we will pause there.